Now, I'm not gonna lie, this right here, it's just kind of funny. Let's talk today about a guy that made a big, a big, amazing donation to the Montreal hospital. A guy that was the face that ran the place with the Canadiens organization. A guy that was Montreal's last gosh darn Norris Trophy winner. All the way back in that lockout-shortened year. Let's talk today about PK Subban. And compare him to the greatness that Montreal is seeing on their blue line today out of Lane Hutson. Not necessarily because there's a stylistic or a statistical comparison to make here, but because there is a very interesting link. Take a look at what Habs fanatics posted on Twitter. 12 years ago today was August 4th, 2026, so this tweet is from a few weeks ago. But 12 years ago on that day, PK Subban signed his massive 8-year contract worth $9 million per season. What's crazier is that 12 years later, Lane Hutson signed the same 8-year term for an even lower AAV of $8.85 million. If Hutson continues developing at this pace, that deal might become one of the biggest contract bargains the NHL has seen in decades. Honestly, I think Habs Fanatics is on to something right here. You want to talk about the best contracts the league has ever seen? Yeah, okay, at least in the modern era, we're talking about the Nathan McKinnon deal when that guy was making like $6.6 something million forever. Like, he was putting up 100 plus point campaigns over and over and over again. He was making $6.3 million a year up until he ended up winning the gosh darn Stanley Cup. You had Leon Draisaitl, who was making $8.5 million a year for a long, long time before getting upped to $14 million, which saw him be the highest paid NHL player for at least a little bit until Kirill Kaprizov signed his $17 million contract. But you think about it in retrospect, PK Subban signed a $9 million AAV contract with the Montreal Canadiens all the way back in gosh darn... what was it, August 2014? That was 12 years ago, and he signed a $9 million AAV deal. You know who makes $9 million AAV as a defenseman today? You've got freaking Cale Makar going out there with that amount of dough on his payroll. Cale Makar's making $9 million a year. Granted, it's until the end of this upcoming season. But you also have other guys. I mean, Darnell Nurse, for example, is also making $9 million a year. But obviously, we understand he is maybe not the cream of the crop when it comes to defensemen in the National Hockey League. Jacob Trouba is a teammate of Darnell Nurse's. He's making $8.25 million a year. So just for a few $100,000 more than Jacob Trouba, you can get yourselves a Lane Hutson. How does that sound? Not only did PK Subban absolutely tear the league apart, which warranted, in a way, the $9 million AAV contract that he signed back in 2014, but looking at it in retrospect, Lane Hutson is just, I don't want to say like a definitively better talent. Like, holistically, I think if you take the entire career that Hutson has had and you compare it to what was the first 2 full seasons of PK Subban's career with the Montreal Canadiens, obviously Hutson is better. But PK, he has a Norris for a reason. And that one season that he did win the Norris, he was an electric beast. Sub-point per game, which it was a shortened season, so I understand. But also, this was back in the era where defensemen rarely scored at a point-per-game rate. Like, you take a look at 2013-14, this is shortly before PK Subban signed the $9 million AAV contract. I mean, yeah, you had one guy who was over 100 points, that was Sidney Crosby. Getzlaf was second in the league, 87 points. Where's the first defenseman? Okay, it was Erik Karlsson. Whoop-de-doo, big surprise on that. He had 74 points, but it was Erik Karlsson. He's the first D you'll see for a long, long time. The next D was Duncan Keith, who had 61 points. This was a really different era of NHL scoring. Nowadays, you've got defensemen like Erik Karlsson breaking 100 points. You've got Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar and all these guys getting up to 90-plus points consistently. Zach Werenski getting to 80-plus. Lane Hutson getting to 78 points and 16 points in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. It's a different game, so I understand that the ceiling that Hutson has accomplished for himself is not the very top of the mountain in terms of today's NHL standards. PK, you could debate, he was doing that. But at the same time, I mean, you think about it, Lane Hutson, just what he's done holistically, it's better than everything PK was able to do for the Montreal Canadiens. And even though PK's $9 million seemed like a reasonable contract at the time, you just got to look at how it went down. PK, he stopped being that dude for Montreal. Not because he stopped playing well, but because it was very obvious that Marc Bergevin and the Canadiens just did not vibe with him, even though they gave him the money to stick around in the first place, traded him to Nashville, which, to be fair, he actually did have a pretty good run there. He started out by making the gosh darn Stanley Cup Finals. How about that? And then he finished off his career with another $9 million AAV year with New Jersey, 2021-2022. He had 22 points in 77 games, and then PK called it quits right after that because the contract that he was coming off of was $72 million total. Lane Hutson's current contract is a $70.8 million contract. Hutson is the better player at 22 than PK was at 22, and Hutson already has outproduced PK in PK's best overall season of National Hockey League production. I mean, PK Subban had a 60-point year in 82 games. Sure, the Norris winning year was a higher point per game number, but then again, shortened year. Lane Hutson has already eclipsed that, and he's making less money. That's crazy to me, man. Let's go out there and read some of the replies. This is on a GM who destroyed the franchise by being incompetent. This is on Marc Bergevin, not Subban, Anderson, Gallagher, or Price. Contracts that today still hamper the Habs because of arrogance, ineptitude, on a GM who bought dogs instead of earning loyalty. Sure glad Hughes and Gorton have rewrote the book. Yeah, they've built a really good system, haven't they? Sign Nick Suzuki to a cheap deal, make him believe in the system, and then get everybody else on cheap deals because, hey, Nick Suzuki's making 7.8. Like, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky, y'all aren't going out there and making more than him. Now everybody's signed to a cheap deal. Subban, $72 million for 8 years. Hutson, $70.8 million over 8 years. There is a difference, Johnny said. Those 8 years for Subban were all free agent years. With Hutson, only 2 or maybe 3 years are free agent years in that contract. With the 12-year gap, that $9 million is worth around $13 million today. So I guess there is some context that needs to be added when acknowledging the date and the free agency eligibility for these players as to how that incorporates into the dollar amount. Lane Hutson, I mean, he signed out of his ELC, so obviously he's not like he's like totally locking himself up for good by the time 2034 comes along. He'll be 30. Like, he'll be able to sign another contract, maybe for $14 million a year. He's that good, isn't he? Especially if the cap's going up, he can get like 19. With that said, though, the fact is right now he's making less than PK was. And PK, for all of his strengths, was still a guy that had a very difficult end during his time in Montreal and as an NHL player with New Jersey. You can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How interesting is it that Hutson is making less than Subban was, despite Subban's contract being from 12 years ago? Thoughts in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on. And bye.